Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science Podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I am so happy to introduce our special guest on the show today. Today I'm joined by Dr. Mike Denne, who's the Vice President of the U.S. Medical Affairs for Rare Disease and Plasma-Derived Therapies at Takeda, to discuss the company's approach to advancing patient care, particularly in the area of rare diseases, through medical innovation and collaboration. Dr. Denne is a medical affairs leader focused on rare disease with more than 15 years of experience in all aspects of medical affairs, including senior leadership of multiple therapeutic areas, product launch, building and leading field medical teams, and medical operations. He has a passion for building and leading medical teams and organizations with a strong track record of success. Dr. Denne is also passionate about advancing science and education, particularly in diseases where efforts are incrementally impactful for healthcare providers, patients, and caregivers who are impacted by them. Dr. Denne will share his insights into how Takeda's U.S. Medical Affairs team is helping shape the future of rare disease treatment access, education, and patient engagement. So to learn more about this and more and delve right into it, let's turn to Dr. Denne now. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thanks, Ayesha, for having me. I look forward to speaking with you.
Likewise, really looking forward to the conversation, a very important one. You're leading such important work in the rare disease space, so really looking forward to learning more about that. And I'd like to learn more about actually the field of medical affairs and how you got into it, what it entails, and where it fits into the landscape and ecosystem of drug discovery and drug development.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it. I'm a pharmacist by background, and I really enjoyed my time working in the pharmacy and clinical pharmacy setting, working with patients and really delivering really great education and medical opportunities for the patients who needed them. While I was doing it, though, I was always focused on and looking forward to opportunities to help not just one patient at a time, but to do things that helped populations of patients, paradigm shifts, and the way people were using medicines, and to some degree even new medicines that might be out there waiting to be found, discovered, and approved. And so that was why I started to explore other directions in my career. And after a lot of searching, I found medical affairs in the pharmaceutical industry felt like the right place for me and the aspirations that I had. And so I pursued that, and have been in the industry now for nearly 20 years, working in rare disease for the last 15 or so. And I'm quite happy with my choice. I feel like I've had wonderful opportunity to partner with scientists and clinicians as we focus on improving outcomes of patients with rare diseases.
It's wonderful. And in terms of the role of medical affairs, how have you seen perhaps potentially the field evolve as really the bridge between R&D, commercial teams, and external stakeholders?
Yeah, it's really an exciting time to be in medical for a lot of reasons. It has evolved over time, but what I'd say now is medical affairs is positioned really well to influence drug development all the way from the time of the inception of a molecule through its life cycle of approval and eventually into the later life cycle stages of a product. And the way we do that is, we're really well in touch with the scientific community. We're in touch with the clinical community, and we're also in touch with patient advocacy and advocacy organizations. And so what we understand, I would argue really well, maybe better than most people in organizations, is the entire patient journey. What's impacting these patients the most, and what are they looking for out of their treatments? And how do we then take those insights and influence the way that we develop products? And so the way we do that internally, armed with all of that information, is to start working with our researchers at the point of target product profile development. So this is when we've got a molecule and we know it's active in a certain area, and we're trying to decide how we want to study it. Where is it going to have the biggest impact to these patient populations? And so we're influencing and informing at that early stage to make sure we're making the right choices early. And then as we progress through clinical development, moving from phase 1 and 2 studies and start thinking about phase 3, the influence that we have remains, the influence of the scientists and the patient community, but also we start then thinking about access, because really not that helpful to have products approved if access isn't there for the patients who need it. And so at that point in the development in medical, we're oftentimes thinking not only about what's the data we need to get this product approved, but what's the study that we need to run or the endpoints that we need to consider to ensure that once approved, the access is maximized in as much as is possible in that phase 3 study design. So then we move in medical usually to doing education. We're educating about the disease states. We're educating about these new modes of therapy and how they might fit into the broader picture of the treatment paradigms up to and during and right after approval. And then we shift into evidence generation, because we know in the clinical study programs that for very good reasons, we ask very specific questions. We're trying to determine the safety and efficacy of these products. And to do so, you have to limit the populations to some degree to ensure that you're answering that question purely. But it does leave a lot of questions that still need to be explored. Different populations of patients that weren't eligible for the trial, oftentimes even patients who were excluded from the trial for a very specific reason, but might still very much need to consider that therapeutic. So we use real-world evidence generation to answer some of those questions. And then that evidence generation process really continues throughout the life cycle of the products. And once we start answering the more obvious questions that come out and exist, immediately following the phase 3 and clinical programs, we're engaging and continue to engage with the medical and scientific community as new questions come about, whether they're inherent to our product or if there's something changing in the community or the treatment paradigm that has raised new questions about the products that we thought we've answered a lot of them already. And that's what continues throughout the rest of the life cycle of the product. Paradigms change. Technology is changing at such a rapid pace that we've got new questions that we've never had to think about, but we've also got new opportunities. There's personalization of care or combined treatment opportunities, as we look through the lens of what the community's most important needs are.
Indeed. And placing that within the rare disease space, how do the strategies potentially differ for a space like rare disease, where the challenges, the considerations, and the opportunities may be different from other fields, or perhaps not? There's obviously, concepts and the whole of drug development are universally applicable, but of course, rare diseases have their own unique challenges and their own unique considerations, as I mentioned. So, can you speak to us about that? What really defines the rare disease space today and sets it apart as a unique field in drug development?
Yeah, it's a great question. And in fact, rare diseases do have some unique challenges and probably the largest challenges that just by nature of them being rare, there are fewer and fewer patients out there. And so that's a smaller population that we have to study. And what we find oftentimes in these rare disease groups of patients is that even when you gather that small number of patients that you're going to put into clinical studies to test new therapies, even though they have the same disorder, they have different problems and the issues that are showing themselves are multifactorial. And so you have to accept that you have two challenges running in parallel. One, that you have fewer patients to work with, but also that those patients don't just have one single problem. And so you're trying to draw conclusions about the safety and efficacy of a new therapeutic in many cases with a lot of these factors who are sort of working against you. And a couple of things that are happening that are quite interesting now from a regulatory perspective. For a number of years now, we've heard the agency being open to different approaches to evaluating rare disease therapeutics, including supportive real-world evidence to help characterize both the population and the effect of the drugs. And so we're seeing that happen in practice now, which is really exciting. That's something that happened recently for a product that we have at Takeda called PharmD. That is a replacement therapy for patients that have von Willebrand disease. And it's a product that we've had approved now for a number of years, but our labeled indication was somewhat limited. And it was limited for all the reasons we're talking about here. Small population of diverse patients with the disease, and it's hard to characterize, with broad brush strokes, what the effect of the product is. So we recently resubmitted some data coming both from an ongoing clinical program, as well as being supported with some real world evidence that we've collected out of medical affairs in partnership with the community. And we're successful in getting the label of that product expanded, using these creative techniques that overcome some of the challenges that we're talking about here.
Absolutely. And in terms of the as we can call the ecosystem of the stakeholders in any space, and particularly since we're talking about rare disease, of course, who are those important stakeholders? And you did mention patient advocacy groups, just how important they've been. And I really think their role has really evolved and really come forward and have been strengthened in the past decade or so, past 1 or 2 decades, I would say. And so who are those important players that are at the table together? And I would assume that is your role in medical affairs, to really bring all of those stakeholders, all of those players, all of those voices together to glean insights, to guide the drug development processes.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would agree. I think the inclusion of the patient voice in drug development has evolved tremendously in the last 10 years, and maybe the last 5 years. It's been even more obvious. And medical does play a really important role in trying to identify who those stakeholders are and engaging with them to ensure that that their very important input is included into the steps that we take. But I think it's not just medical affairs. We see our R&D organization proper also very much engaged with and involved with the community. And you see more patient input and voice even in regulatory decisions, whether that be in AdComs or advisory input that is sought by the agency. So I think the entire system is to credit for the increased voice of the patients or their caregivers or their advocates in ensuring that our development processes are most helpful. From a Takeda standpoint, I'll say the patient voice is really a core element of how we deliver all of our development strategies. We develop action plans that include the patient voice, but also the advocacy groups as a whole. And we're melding those together, of course, with the scientists' input and the clinicians' input to make sure we've got a well-rounded design. We're not doing anybody any favors if we design trials that are either too complicated or not answering the right questions, even if they happen to be able to pass the regulatory hurdle. And I think that's what we've seen improving in the last number of years. And it's been really great. The key here is making sure that you've got not only a patient voice, but a diverse network of partners influencing how you're making your choices. And it has to happen from early research on, because once you start down a certain path, it's difficult sometimes to change directions or shift. Not that you can't be flexible, but having that input all along the way is really critical to designing good trials and in the end, improving patient outcomes maximally.
And we talk about usually patient access to treatments and all of that, but I also wonder it is very important for researchers and for drug developers to have access to patients as well in the drug development process. And so I know Takeda, of course, a very long-standing company in this space, and a very global company as well. And so what advantages does a company like Takeda have in truly being global and having access to patients? And that diversity also becomes encompassed in that, as you mentioned. If you're looking at recruiting patients globally, conducting multi-center trials, global trials. And so do you feel Takeda really taps into that, having access to all of that worldwide web or network that it's built over the decades? And how does it differ from other companies potentially?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think having a global presence in being in touch with all of these different stakeholders that we've been talking about, not just in the US, but globally, really helps us to understand where the greatest unmet needs are, and how we can deliver medicines to the most countries, that have that need, by engaging with these stakeholders in a very diverse way. I think some of the things that might be unique to Takeda, that give us a really good edge, and maybe particularly in rare disease, is that we've been working in rare disease for decades. And so we've been building this trust and relationship with the rare disease communities. And as a result, sometimes we can even reactively learn things without even reaching out, because we have this really great two-way communication going with the rare disease communities. And they're not shy in telling us if we're doing something that's not exactly the way they would want it, or if there's something that they'd like to see us explore that we're not exploring. And they don't think that's unique to the US. It's something that's happening as we're gathering insights from around the globe. And then once you've done that and you've incorporated that patient voice and the advocacy voice into how you're doing, and you say, we want to hear from you, and then you take that information, you do something with it, and then afterwards you say, thank you for that information. Here's the impact that your input had on how we've done X design of a trial, or even in real world evidence generation, that it furthers that cycle, because now people trust that their investment of time in you is resulting in changes and incorporation of their thoughts and desires, and that trust just builds more and more. And with a focus on diversity too, because we know that there are unmet needs and patient groups out there that we don't commonly hear from reactively. And we do have to go down to the community level and build trust and relationships with specific communities that we know are uniquely impacted by a rare disease in this particular case sometimes, and or to build trust so that these communities aren't afraid to tell us what they think. And so that has to happen at the local level. It can't all be at a national level or a global level. So hopefully that helps to answer your question.
No, absolutely. I think what really came out is building that trust, and like you mentioned, Takeda's been in the rare disease space for decades, and so I think you've really been able to build that reputation of trust, and I think that's really fantastic and really sets Takeda apart, especially in the rare disease space. So, and today in the rare disease space, what kinds of, dare I say trends? I don't really like using that word, but what are sort of the things that are trending? And of course, for a lot of rare diseases, the majority, if I may say, are genetic based, and so we've really seen the advent of gene therapies come to light from concept to commercialization, and finally, hitting the market. And we've really seen sort of a surge of gene therapies being approved in the past couple of years. And so where do you see the space today, and where do you see it going in terms of those technologies and approaches to rare disease treatments today?
It's a great question. I think what we're seeing happening, so we know there are lots of rare diseases, over 7,000 rare diseases that have been discovered, and that number, if you talk to the rare disease experts, is growing daily. It's probably actually closer to 10,000 rare diseases, and that's probably not even near where we'll be in 5 years. And as you pointed out, 80% or roughly 80% of those disorders are genetic in nature, and so are at least theoretically amenable through some kind of a gene therapy approach. And so it's a very attractive treatment option for these rare diseases. Should mention that less than 5% of these diseases actually have an approved treatment today. So the amount of opportunity out there is tremendous. And so the advancements in gene therapy, as an example, have been really exciting. And as you point out, they seem to be showing up more and more regularly in the clinic, and a number of recent approvals. The challenge that we have in rare disease, getting back to where we started this conversation, is that there are so few patients often to study it. And then when you start talking about gene therapy, the real opportunity isn't to develop a new gene therapy platform for every rare disease, but to develop platforms that can be reapplied to multiple rare diseases. And I think that we'll see that as the next phase of this. We've got one-offs occurring now, and those
Right.
gene therapy platforms are being developed and advanced through the clinic. That we're really going to need to get to a point where those platforms can be reapplied without a full animal model through phase 3 clinical program. That may not be a sustainable approach necessarily. So gene therapy is really exciting. I suspect that's where we're headed. And as we get to that point from both a policy and a science standpoint, I think we'll start to see a lot of these diseases have new treatments and therapies that are moving a lot faster than we can today, and still providing the safety and efficacy that we need. Now, outside of gene therapy, I think there's also a lot of exciting things happening with technology that are taking advantage of non-gene therapies to make us better at using them, particularly around more personalized approaches to treatment. We know that individual patients have different needs and they have different desires, and what they're looking for out of their treatment isn't the same, even if you've got the same disorder. And so we're using data and technology now, and increasingly so, to identify what the best approach is for an individual patient, particularly if we're using replacement therapies, let's say, for those genetic disorders where gene therapies either aren't feasible or aren't available. And so personalized treatment, I think, is another trend that we've been talking about for quite a long time, but it's starting to come to fruition now because of our ability to analyze large data sets and make unique decisions and choices in real time. That would never have been feasible even a couple of years ago. So that's an exciting trend that I don't think is ending anytime soon.
And could you also speak to us about, you also lead plasma-derived therapies at Takeda, and so I'm really interested to learn about that particular space or niche, and what types of indications are you working in that space, and what types of therapies and treatments are in the pipeline?
Yeah, that's another really interesting area. So the plasma-derived treatments are also treating rare diseases. It's just segmented in our world because those treatments are not based on recombinant technologies, but are coming from donations and plasma fractionation. And so the biggest areas that we work in the plasma-derived therapies area are immune deficiencies, where we've got primary immune deficiencies, and there are many of them. And we're replacing immune globulins to prevent or treat infections that might happen in those patients that have immune deficiencies. It also turns out that use of immune globulin replacement also is helpful in several neuromuscular disorders like CIDP. And so we're working in that space as well, and continuing to advance our knowledge about the use of the products in that space, just to name a couple. And so the innovation in this space oftentimes looks like reusing existing types of therapies in new disease states, or we're changing the delivery mechanism. So we have products that are not just intravenously infused, but infused subcutaneously. And in the case of HyQvia, as an example, this is a facilitated sub-Q infusion where large volumes can be infused subcutaneously, because you're also using hyaluronidase to create a space for a large subcutaneous infusion, which would be much larger than one could use without that type of technology. So that's a treatment that's not only used in immune deficiencies, but also in some of these neuromuscular disorders like CIDP. And then future innovation, looking to increase the concentration of that, so one can have a shorter infusion with and a smaller volume, delivering the same amount of therapy. And then some more creative approaches that aren't quite ready for showtime yet, but that might be using small molecules in the space to help treat some of these same disorders.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of areas, it really sounds like Takeda kind of covers it all. Like you mentioned, neuromuscular disorders, immune-based diseases, hematological diseases as well. So is there one particular area, or is it really all-encompassing, and really does the company really focus on just a couple of areas, or is it really the rare disease space in general?
We've got a pretty broad area of diseases that we cover. You mentioned rare bleeding disorders. We also do some rare other rare hematologic disorders and clotting space, such as treatments for TTP. We have a product called Zinma that we use for congenital TTP. We have in our pipeline products where we're exploring immune thrombocytopenia as an example. So in the hematologic space, we do a lot. We also do a lot in rare neurology. In rare neurology and rare immunology. And the rare immunology, in addition to a lot of the areas we were just talking about in the plasma-derived therapies, we also have been leaders in hereditary angioedema for quite some time. And we have a number portfolio of products that we partner with the community within that space. With rare metabolic disorders, such as lysosomal storage disorders, where we've been focused for a number of years and continue to be committed, to innovation in that space. And that's just to name a few. We have a number of other areas that we're focused either in our pipeline or with current products. So I think we are always open to delivering innovation in the rare disease space, including outside of the areas that I just described in the future.
And I think we've also been seeing in the past several years really more of an openness to developing partnerships. And so how important are those in drug development today, whether it's with large pharma as yourselves at Takeda or partnering with smaller biotech companies, academia? So what is the role of those kinds of partnerships today and how important are they?
Yeah, partnerships have always been a large part of the Takeda development strategy. I think the value in having the partnerships several fold. One is it allows you to work in a much more broad capacity than you would if you only worked on the molecules and the concepts that you had within your four walls. So you have the ability to work on a lot of projects at one time because of the partners and what they're contributing to it. You also have the opportunity to learn. I mean, these partners we're learning from in an incredible way all the time. And it's a two-way learning relationship as we're all sort of focused on the same thing, which is, bringing new therapeutics to the market to improve patient outcomes. So those partnerships are other private companies. As you pointed out, there are partnerships with academia. We've got public-private partnerships that we nurture, and that helps us all move, in the same direction, helps us spread out our capacity in a much more thoughtful way. We're also partnering a lot more with technologically speaking tech companies, whether that's in the realm of helping us diagnose patients using new technology, or if it's in the realm of looking at evidence generation by accessing data in a different way than we could in the past, and linking data sets in unique ways that we never could have dreamed of in the past. So it's not just development, it's also technology. And you think that's what's going to help us stay current, even ahead of the curve as we move into the future.
And from your perspective, what does the future hold? I know it's a very broad general question, but for rare diseases, and what are some of the things that you're most excited about? Whether it's greater partnerships and input from patient groups, increased diversity in trials, really bringing that more so in, and the technologies. I think we've touched on all of them, but what really would be your message as someone, a leader in the rare disease space who's seen things evolve? Where do you see things heading, and what excites you most?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. I think the first one is in and around data. Data is becoming more and more accessible. The quality of it is improving tremendously, and our ability to link it together to answer questions is getting better and better, by the day. And so data in many ways is power in that it informs the way we're answering the right questions and the right way. And I think that's going to continue to improve in the coming years, and predicting where that's going, partnering with the right data organizations and making sure that we're advanced in that regard in the rare disease community is going to be very powerful. We're always going to be somewhat limited by the numbers of patients in these areas, but we're really maximizing the opportunity now with data in the rare disease space. So that's certainly one area that I'm excited about, and I think is going to continue to grow. From a diversity and equity standpoint, I think we've gained a great skill set over the past 5 years. That's become really embedded in the way that we think. And I don't think that's going away. And these improved data sets will even help us to continue to advance our thinking in that space. And so that, I would say, is layered on top of the advancing data arena. And then the other thing that comes to mind is really seeing a nice trajectory of the partnership with regulatory agencies in the way that communication is happening in rare disease, where you've got more opportunities to engage with regulators earlier on in development and throughout the development process. The openness to utilizing well-collected real-world data to help inform the way that our products are being approved and labeled and the way that they're being used. And so the partnership with regulators, I think, has improved tremendously, and the trajectory of that is really good as well. And then finally, as we were talking earlier, I think that the approach to true personalized medicine, whether that be platform gene therapy technologies that are reapplied in rarer and rarer disorders, because it's possible when you do that, or the best and most efficient and effective use of our replacement therapies in other places where we have treatments approved, is going to continue to help us, in the rare disease space. As the earlier we diagnose these patients and get them treated, particularly when they have loss of function disorders, the better off those communities are going to be. And so that's where we're focused. So those are just a few things I'm excited about. Certainly there are a lot more.
Well, Dr. Denne, thank you so much for sharing all of those insights and for your time today. It was a wonderful conversation, and really, above all, thank you so much for the very important work that you lead in the field. And we're looking forward to all of the exciting developments that you talked about, and we're really looking forward to seeing things progress in the rare disease space. And again, thank you for all of your work in it and your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Ayesha.
Thank you. All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.